So you'll see a little pop-up here. And then also, as we go through the webinar, you can enter your questions that you have for our panelists into the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar, time permitting. So again, it's my honor and privilege to welcome you here for our WTS Story of Advancing Women webinar. We do have a slight change. Our incoming chair for the WTS International Board of Directors, Janet Walker Ford, unfortunately had a traveling conflict and is in the air right now. So I'll be stepping in for her as moderator for today's session, but we still have a phenomenal panel here today. We could spend the entire hour really talking about their background and experience and knowledge. So I'm just going to do some brief bios and introduce our panelists here today so that we can get right into the questions and get into the story of WTS. So our first panelist today is Chris Venice. She was the founder of WTS in 1977 while representing the CN Railroad on Capitol Hill. She's been an active member ever since. As women began to enter the professional workforce, Business Week magazine singled out WTS as a unique type of women's organization focused on career growth. Chris guided WTS through its formative years from one Washington, D.C. based entity to a national association with chapters across the country. Chris has held many leadership positions, including a member of the WTS Scholarship Foundation and chair of the first Ray LaHood Salute. She was awarded WTS Woman of the Year and served as moderator of the 25th anniversary celebration. She also created the Innovative Transportation Solutions Award. As president of Capital Partnerships, Chris has decades of federal and state transportation policy experience. She's affiliated with the Livingston Group, a leading Washington, D.C. lobbying and public affairs firm. She's a recognized leader in national infrastructure policy and innovative financing of public projects. She wins dollars for clients across the country, applying creativity and passion to mining billions of dollars for diverse initiatives. So thank you, Chris, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Grace Kruniken. Grace Kruniken is a long-standing transit leader, including as general manager of BART in the San Francisco Bay Area. She has served as deputy administrator at the Federal Transit Administration and as a director of both the Oregon and Seattle DOTs. She's also the author of Boots on the Ground, Flats in the Boardroom, which I know many of our WTS members have read. And Grace was the WTS International Chair in 1988. Thank you, Grace, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our next panelist is Sunny House. Sunny is the founding principal of Sunny House Strategies, a consulting firm that helps business leaders optimize their practices to grow and prosper. As a professional civil engineer, she has been responsible for securing and delivering over $3 billion worth of complex public works and private sector infrastructure projects in the Western United States, while serving in executive leadership roles for several global infrastructure consulting firms such as URS, AECOM, and Parsons. Sunny is currently serving as an outside director of the boards of San Diego. Am I saying that correctly, Sunny?
San Dieguito.
Thank you. Engineering Company and Circle Point, two private firms delivering public infrastructure and private development projects in California. Sunny believes in giving back to her professional community and has served on the boards of several professional and nonprofit organizations and foundations for more than 3 decades. Sunny has been a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in the workforce, and more specifically about the role women can play in leaderships of organizations. She's been honored by the WTS San Diego chapter as the Woman of the Year and Member of the Year, and by the WTS Los Angeles chapter as one of the top 25 most influential women in the LA region transportation industry. Sunny was the 2004 chair of the WTS International Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us, Sunny.
It's so fun to be here.
And our final panelist for today is our current chair of the WTS International Board, Paula Hammond. Paula is the National Transportation Market Leader for WSP USA in Seattle, Washington. She's responsible for representing the company as an industry leader and supporting clients in the emerging and integrated transportation topics of resilience, pricing, system operations, and performance management. Paula dedicated her 34-year public service career to improving transportation systems in Washington State and served as Washington Secretary of Transportation from 2007 to 2013. She has been a national figure of transportation issues with leadership on numerous AASHTO committees, TRB Executive Board, and is Senior Vice Chair of ARTBA Board of Trustees. She is, as I mentioned, our current chair and has weathered us through, helped lead us through 2 years of a pandemic, and is looking forward to an in-person conference in Seattle, Washington this May. Thank you for joining us, Paula.
Good morning. We are emerging.
We are. Well, let's get right into it. Chris, I want to start with you as the founder of WTS. Speak to us a little bit about what the transportation industry was like back in 1977. What led you to organize the Women's Transportation Seminar, what is now WTS International?
Sure. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the celebration of WTS. And, you know, our industry was late in having women join. And truly in 1977, it was awash in a sea of men. And we were our own little islands. You know, ours is an industry of heavy equipment. There were no large IT departments, no planning departments. Women were just coming into the professional ranks across lots of industries. But our industry was a lot slower in terms of women coming into this male-dominated field. Every mode was regulated back then, and women had a lot of clerical positions in transportation, and unfortunately, they were often pigeonholed there, but professional presence was slim. You know, you felt alone. I remember feeling isolated, sort of untethered, because there were no female role models to which I could plan a career path. The French have a great saying that I think speaks to the way a lot of us felt back then, was you just don't feel right in your skin. You didn't feel fully yourself. The optics of a WTS meeting in 1978 were so different than what we were experiencing, because we were always the only women in the room. We were the odd person out. At social functions, I remember I just naturally gravitated to the wives of my male colleagues. I represented a railroad, and when we would go out to look at the railroad, spent days out on the road, they would bring a separate sleeping car for me, because the optics and the norms then were so different. I couldn't share a sleeping car with a lot of men. Again, alone in business meetings, we had a hard time blending in, and always felt like an odd person out. So I don't really remember a pivotal point that said, oh yes, let's organize WTS. But I do remember a desire to make more professional relationships with women in transportation. And my boss recognized that. So in the summer of 1977, he said, why don't you go out and see if there are other women working in the field of transportation? And before I did that, I thought it was best to seek out a few female leaders who were at the National Transportation Safety Board, who were at the Interstate Commerce Commission. That was the agency, of course, that regulated the modes. And I spoke to them first about the concept and asked them if indeed there was consensus to form this organization. Would they support it? Would they use their position? Would they speak? And would they join? And when they said yes, that was enough for us to try to pull 40 women together. And that was hard to get their names for our first meeting. And we asked the questions that you all continue to ask. Are we at a deficit in terms of career growth? Is there a need to create an identity for women in the field? And can we help ourselves like we saw for decades men were? And in fact, it was a resounding yes. And as we began to grow, and we grew quickly, there was such an incredible response. I think by year 2 or 3, we had 300 members. We quickly began to change the face of transportation and said to the world, look, we're going to give our highest energy, our best professional expertise, not only to our careers, but to this new organization for which we're really proud. And I just want to close because you mentioned the business week, Sarah, which was so funny. So once we got going, we had great momentum. We were all paddling hard together. We were really serious about this organization. And so when Business Week did an analysis of all these new women's groups that were popping up that focused on dressing for success. So you were to dress for like a man, and that was how you were going to succeed in the world of business. Again, you know, women were neophytes coming into the profession. And when they asked me about why WTS was not concentrating on dress for success, I just sort of said, oh, you know, Padiddle, we don't have time for that. We are going to establish ourselves in transportation, and dressing is not necessary for us. So we had big heads, and I think it was the big heads though that got us where we are today.
Absolutely. I feel like that answer has been driving WTS for the last 45 years. So I appreciate that. I know, Chris, as you and I were talking, preparing for this webinar, you shared a story about early WTS and meetings that were at the Army Navy Club. And we're based here, headquarters is now in Washington, D.C. So I know the Army Navy Club well, but share with our audience today about what it was like being a woman entering that club.
As a woman attending a business meeting at the Army Navy Club, you were not permitted to enter through the front door. There was a side door for women. And you can just imagine what that meant. That meant you felt demeaned, inferior, humiliated. You knew there was something wrong, but you were an equal at that business meeting, and you had to get there, so you went through the side door. And that wasn't an uncommon practice in other areas in the mid 1970s. It was hard. It was demeaning.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Grace, I want to turn to you a little bit. We're going to kind of fast forward now from the 1970s into the 1980s. So your term as chair was a little bit over a decade, right, following the founding of WTS. Was the landscape changing at all at that time? What was the size and role of WTS kind of within the industry in the late 80s?
We had done some. I want to say I was one of the people that came right behind Chris's organization. I went to DC in October of '79, and they were just starting up their monthly meetings. And it was just, we always talk about the people that come before you, but Chris and I have talked over the years. She was just enough ahead of me that all of her work paid off for me just directly, because when we started going I was a presidential management intern, so I was rotating around the transportation department and in different positions. And as I got there to each of these positions, I would see maybe one or two females in the professional ranks with 98 men. And going to the WTS meeting, you saw all these women there and thought, oh, hey, this is a thing. I'm a thing. It's okay. You're not an odd duck. You actually, there's a place for you. And sometimes because WTS is so cross-cutting in its in the industry and goes everywhere, you saw leaders in transit like Lillian Liberty. You saw leaders like Chris in the rail industry. And even in aviation, there were women that would come and represent aviation. And as an attendee, just seeing the women, they were the speakers. You'd sit down and network at a table, and it was the instant network. And it was a continuation of that in the late 80s, early 90s that we stayed with and tried to enhance and grow. We didn't really grow much more than the 300 for that decade or so. And it was what we were growing was the chapter representation at that point in time. And so we were quite interested in making sure that all cities had access to them. And as people started up their chapters, that we would help them kind of replicate what Chris described in Washington and what we had experienced with both public and private sectors. And we were working hard to make sure that both the public and private sectors would sponsor in an area. I remember Denver being quite private sector oriented, Portland being more public sector oriented. Lillian Hames and I started the chapter in Portland early on. And then when I, worked my way up to president, we were trying to help locals. I had that background of the chapter thing, which, when Chris was there, New York and Washington were the two centers of the world. Luckily, they're not anymore, Chris. All of us across the country. No. Anyway, so our focus was expansion. And our focus was public and private, making sure both were there, because in different communities, different folks could sponsor. There wasn't, in some places, it wasn't appropriate for the government to sponsor this or that. In other places, it was. And so you look to the private sector. And it was also good in careers for women to have examples going back and forth between the two. That was highly prized. So we also tried the network experience to try and get speakers, use the board, and any travels they had to plan ahead to be a speaker, so that you would be able to advertise in your local chapter that you had someone visiting from Washington, D.C. or someone visiting from the Northwest or something, if you were opening the Phoenix chapter. And so that we were trying to add a little prestige by hosting out of town speakers and using the federal folks to be the speakers if we could get them, because that impressed our bosses. There was a little bit of trying to look up and connect with the leadership across the, if you were a planner too in Portland, you were trying to get the director's attention. So you would invite the director to be a speaker. And there was a lot of purposeful networking, I'll call it, that went on.
Well, I can tell you, we still use your guidance today. It is still a huge part of our chapter formation that there's both the public and private sector that's built into our chapter handbook. So thank you for establishing that. We still use that today. And I think that's one of the unique things about WTS is that we, at all of our events across North America, across all of our chapters, having both public and private as part of WTS, I think is what makes us unique.
Sarah, I think it's a feature that if the members themselves would think about it, if you're in the private sector, having contacts in the public sector is extremely valuable. Whether it's as I said before, an engineer one or a planner one, or it's the director, that network, depending on what project you're working on, sometimes access to the lower levels are just as important as the upper levels, knowing who to talk to. And the same thing is true in the public sector. If you've got the private sector folks out there and you know what's going on in the private sector, what new things they have, what new techniques or, technology that they have, you're smarter for it and able to put the requests out that make more sense and provide the community a better service. So I think it's a very practical thing. And then from a networking point of view, you get a new mayor, you get a new head of transportation, your boss changes, you want to have a network out there and a place to go just in case the new mayor coming in or the new governor coming in or the new president of the company coming in isn't into fill in the blank.
Yeah.
You need that network to help you when things start to change. You just have to be agile, and that network allows you to think beyond your own organization. So I think it's extremely valuable. I think it's one of the, besides the personal side of having developing friends and acquaintances, just the professional safety net that it provides, I think is very valuable.
Hey, Sarah, could I jump in just real quickly?
Sure.
Grace, I totally agree with everything you said, but I want to say that early on, wouldn't you agree, Grace? One of the great offerings WTS had was for women who were not in a position at work to be a project manager. Their boss didn't believe that they could take on bigger responsibilities. They used WTS. They told us time and time again as their experience, hey, I want to be a chair in WTS. I'm going to learn to manage communications and outreach. So just to say, that was another huge contributor of WTS to women's careers when they couldn't do it in the workplace.
Right. And if you're the president of the chapter, and we push this a lot in terms of leadership development, if you were the president of the chapter, then you were the one that stood up at the meetings and had a role to play. Now, you may have not planned the meeting, but you're the one that's in front. So if you've got, whether it's 40 people in the room or 400 people in the room, you're the one, your boss sees you. If you're smart, you get your boss to some of these bigger presentations, and there in front of everybody, your agency or your firm is represented. Here's Sunny House from Kroniken Industries, and she's out, making the case, and her boss is like, whoa, it brings it in, and the boss sees you networking with everyone. You're in charge, you make the funny remarks, and they're thinking you can't help but elevate, assuming you do a good job, which we always do.
That's great. That's great. Sunny, I want to jump over to you. We're going to jump ahead another 15, 16 years here up to 2004. When you were chair of WTS International, what milestones were most notable during your tenure as chair, looking back, at that time?
Well, there's so many to talk about. And it was really fun actually going back and remembering all of them. I really believe that the 2000 decade was one of the most transformational decades for WTS. Thanks to the efforts of everyone that came before us, we actually made huge strides in moving the organization to the next level. So let me set the stage. Early 2000s, we were about 30 chapters now, about 3,100 members. We had just signed a contract with APTA to provide us dedicated administrative support. So all of our administrative work was being done through APTA employees that were dedicated to WTS, and then the rest was all volunteers, committees, board members, and lots of committees. We were just really starting to get more recognized in the transportation scene as a great professional organization and a place for networking and access to decision makers. Men were joining our organization more, so it was becoming, we were really being placed on the scene. In 2003, we did a strategic plan. And based on that strategic plan, we really increased our branding. We actually changed our logo and added the tagline, Advancing Women in Transportation. Now we had we were really focusing on that mission of advancing women and showing it. We were not afraid anymore. We ramped up our efforts to appoint women to government and corporate positions, corporate boards and positions. We participated also at the state level. We were talking to the governor's offices. We were talking to the White House. We were talking to the Secretary of Transportation to get more women into those appointed positions. We launched our first website in 2004 at the 2004 conference, and we worked towards creating a more unified and consistent image. Now imagine, we're growing fast, but chapters have their own mind or their own way of doing things, and we're still struggling probably, but in those days it was very difficult. So having everyone use the same logo was quite a conversation. And we launched the leadership training program. We partnered at Rutgers University and offered that to our members. We also decided we really needed to provide more training opportunities for our chapter leadership. And that was one way of getting them to the conferences or to the program, to the board meetings, because they were being trained. We stabilized our financial system a little bit better. We created the corporate sponsorship program, both for WTS and for WTS scholarship. So things were really moving so fast, and we had so many initiatives in place. So I took over presidency, and at that time we called us a president, not chairs. But after Laura Ray, who was in 2000, and then Mary Jane O'Mara in 2002, had great big shoes to fill. We had so many initiatives going on, about 30 different things happening, committees and task forces, that, as you mentioned earlier, I learned how to manage this big group with a work plan. I had this infamous worksheet, and some called it the dreaded worksheet, because every month everyone had to update. I had it all color coordinated, make sure that we were moving, we were doing things, and everyone participated. We worked really hard. This was our volunteer work, but we really looked at it as a second job, and we had to make sure we were succeeding. So there are three really significant moments in my term that I really remember so fondly that I want to share with you all. Number one is one morning I was at home getting ready to go to work, and I get a phone call, and on the other side of the line is Valerie Todd from London. And she called me to find out how we can start a chapter in London. I was shocked, surprised. I knew there was something going on. There were some discussions, but never imagined to have this phone call. So we worked together with London chapter. We set it up, and we actually attended. A group of WTS LA members and myself attended their inauguration, and we basically officially launched them. And when that happened, we decided that it was time for us to become an international organization. So on April 1st, 2005, we announced that we are now an international organization. We had already signed up Vancouver, British Columbia, Strait of Georgia chapter, at that time, but now it's time to make it international. So that was really a defining moment. The other one is when we finally were at a point to hire our own staff and hire our own executive director. We went through that in 2006 and signed on the staff that was going to take over. But for me, a defining moment was when the board was meeting in Washington, D.C., and they had us visit the what was going to be the WTS office. And when I walked in, Margaret Mullins pointed to the wall that was right across the door and said, "And this is where the WTS sign is going to be." And that was like, I had chills. It's like, wow, we've gotten to a point where we're going to have our own sign on our own wall, and we're going to have our own staff. So that was just amazing, a really amazing experience. And the last one is where my last act as president of WTS. When I took over in 2004, in my inauguration speech, I threw a challenge to the organization. We had been hovering around 3,000 membership for a decade. Same thing, we were just having trouble growing. So I threw this challenge to the organization, and I said, if you all move our membership to 4,000, surpass 4,000, I will belly dance on stage at the end of my presidency. And never thought they would do it. It was just something that I just threw out. Well, sure enough, that whole term was about getting to this 4,000 membership, and we surpassed it. I was now having to, I guess, deliver my promise, but I was happy to do it. I'm from Iran. Iranians celebrate with dance. So it was really a defining moment, and I had a very demure costume, but it was such a great celebration, and I was happy to really celebrate the success of our chapter. And we continue our organization, and we continued to grow under Ann Kobe and Elaine Dozensky in the 2000s.
That's phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you, Sunny. And we moved offices during the pandemic, and it took us a while to get settled, but the next time you're in DC, we will have to show you our new offices, because I'm with you. Putting that sign above the window, it means something. It really does. I want to go, Paula, now. Here we are. Fast forward another 10, 15 years. We're in 2022, 45 years into WTS's legacy, dealing with a pandemic, but also at the same time, a once in a lifetime transportation funding package, but also a workforce shortage, right? So you're kind of highs and lows here. Having heard from 3 previous chairs of WTS, where are we today, and what roles does WTS play in the industry today?
Well, I love the way this story's been building through the decades, and I think this webinar should be required listening for every WTS member to really understand the roots that we came from. It's so emblematic of the kinds of careers many of us have had, and the opportunity when together we work to accomplish a goal that we truly can. And I think that's why a women's group now, as we branch into not just advancing women and working to diversify all of our workforce, it's something that we talked about when about 4 years ago, I was vice chair, and under Maggie Walsh as chair, we decided we needed a refresh in our brand. And partly because graphic styles have changed over the years, but we came to see it as an opportunity to refresh and rebrand and re-energize our mission. So what you see behind Sarah and myself and Sunny are the WTS brands that we have today. And I smiled when somebody said the mission was advancing women, because we didn't want to lose that as a brand or a tagline. But what we've come to realize over the years and the growth of WTS is that we as women are advancing transportation, and only when we advance women can we advance transportation, as we all see the public we serve needing representation of people who look like them and the people who can do the job perhaps differently, perhaps better. I guess the jury's maybe out on that sometimes, but WTS truly is a thriving organization. We now have 8,500 members. We have 65 chapters around the country and in Canada, so we're still international. And we have, I think, 4 or 5 chapters in formation today. So our growth and our strength and our connection from the board and international level to each of our chapters has only grown stronger over the years. And that's what I love about where we are today. We strengthened our organization base over the last 4 years. Sarah joined us, I think, 3 years ago. Have you had your 3-year anniversary? I think.
A little over 3 years now.
Yeah. And so we have refreshed our staff over time. Sarah, as our president and CEO, as she is now called for the organization, has built a tremendous team, has built a tremendous set of support networks and systems for our chapters so that the burden of running an organization doesn't just fall on them. And we worked hard during my tenure, even though we were all on Zoom. We decided it was time to update our strategic plan. And I would just quickly say that the core tenets of what WTS has been about, to attract, sustain, connect, and advance women, has stayed the same. We've been true to that mission and those pillars of our success. But as we look at today's workforce challenges, Sarah mentioned, and the opportunities that lie before us, not just with the infrastructure bill, but within every state and city in our country, reinvesting in transportation and reimagining what transportation should be for their communities. It's such an opportune time for us to really strengthen, I think, as WTS, our ability to be game changers and to make a difference. So within our strategic plan, one of the things that we really focused on was not only becoming one WTS, the international board, the foundation, we're better than ever connected together to see and to work with our corporate partners and our chapters and our industry partners on how we as a collective can help solve some of the challenges we have in workforce, to provide for our members great education, programming, leadership, but also then to work across the association levels, where many of us are members of many different associations, but to do that in a way that we can reimagine what the workforce of the future will be and help recruit young women and diverse candidates into our industry. I think it was Chris who said, gosh, it used to just be certain kinds of positions that were in transportation. Well, look at what we've become and the opportunities for the disciplines that are needed to pull off a great transportation system today. And we need to re-energize our youth and young folks into understanding why transportation is a career that they could have great success in and really enjoy. So that's been our mission. We're so excited for our conference in Seattle this year, which is really the first time we'll all have been together for 2 years, over 2 years. We had our first board meeting in person in our new office earlier this year, and it's a beautiful office. So if anybody's in DC, please stop by the office and go see how our new staff is turning what we're trying to do into reality.
It's great to hear it, Paula. It's just great to hear the progress that's been made. Congratulations.
It sometimes felt like that hill, you know, that we see this challenge in front of us and are we ever going to get there? But WTS has been such a volunteer organization from the beginning. We've had support from all over the country in helping strengthen what we do. And one of the things, you know, you start looking for markers. You look for that, something that tells you that this organization is really going to make it and is making a difference. And in our most recent nominations for our board, we had over 40 people from around the country nominated to be on our board of directors. And I think we had just a handful of slots that were really open. But the numbers of people wanting to work cross collaboratively between chapters, our regions, and the board have just been tremendous. And it's so exciting to see the professionalism and the strength that is coming in support for women. And I want to make sure that we're all very clear that men who are members of WTS are really great champions of women who support, and we need the men, not just the WTS member men, but we need more men continuing to help support the mission of WTS. And I'm seeing that happen in today's world. So I think it's great.
I just want to add, I think the reason WTS is so special and so successful is the heart of those volunteers. You know, we may have staff at the international level, but we still have so many volunteers at the chapter level, and they are passionate about what they do. So that's what makes WTS.
And I agree with that. I think there's just a rare special spirit about WTS members, their commitment. And it's across the board. To your point, Paul, about the 40 nominees. There is something wonderful about WTS membership and a real sense of community.
I also think the value comes back to the member. I mean, it's not hard to sell once you get someone there. You know, the programs themselves are a great opportunity for people to learn. I remember as an intern coming to Washington and going to WTS, you saw stuff that you wouldn't normally get permission to go see, and access to people. You can go up and talk to them at the break. And so for a firm or for a government entity of any kind, that just the synergy that's there. And as a volunteer, you get to meet with these people. You have their phone numbers. You get to, collaborate, and it accentuates and accelerates your career path, I think, by the access you're provided. It's always been that way. And it just accelerates your career.
That's such a good point. We have a great marketing opportunity inside of our chapters in our local areas. And for people to, when you think about WTS, we're not modally driven. Other organizations locally usually are the traffic engineers or the, one by one. At WTS, you can get information and education about any mode in transportation. You get access and exposure to the leaders of transportation organizations, and you get personal development and leadership development opportunities. And so we're so much more well-rounded, I think, than many associations, that I think it's a great selling point.
Yep. And we have lots of good men that have helped us get there. I mean, when
Sure.
WTS got started, it was the men at US DOT. I was an intern at DOT. It was the men that told you about it and had to sign the permissions, sign the fees and everything else, the Mort Downeys of the world and Tom Downs and Dick Page and everybody else. So, I mean, there were a lot of men that helped us get started, and today the network makes sense to have them in it. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I'm a true testament to everything you all just said, because I had a vice president who told me about WTS, and I went there and I saw these women in the room, and it was like just amazing. WTS has always pushed me to do better. I learned all my leadership skills through WTS, through serving as a chapter president and then at the international level. WTS even forced me to go learn how to speak publicly, and go through Toastmasters, because I knew I was going to be a national president. So WTS has helped me with job applications and getting referrals. I mean, it's just amazing how influential this organization has been in my life and my career, and I'm sure many others. So.
I know Paula can speak to this a little bit too. As we went through the strategic planning process, we had a lot of feedback come in from our members and from our chapter leaders. And I think one of the things that hit home the most was everyone said, you know, WTS is my home. And when I relocate for a new job, the first thing I do is find my WTS network, right, in that new city. And that, you know, I need to find my chapter in my community that's going to help me learn the industry and learn this area too.
Yeah, and it's interesting that none of us have mentioned how much fun we have at WTS events, but that's kind of the underpinning of everything we do, I think, is the friendships, the networking, the coaching, the guidance, I smile every time I see you, Grace, because I remember that while we were colleagues working on building a very complex waterfront project, and sometimes not together on what we thought we should do. You as a friend in transportation, as a woman leader, were always, and still today, look out for other women and give some advice when it's necessary. And, you know, the day you whispered in my ear, keep your eye open on governor changes and be prepared, leave on a high note. You know, it's those kinds of awareness that sometimes we don't see because we're so close to trying to build our career and do what we're trying to do. And the WTS network is there to support, encourage, give advice, watch your back kinds of opportunities for fellow members and friends. That it's you know, really a tremendous organization.
It brings people together that wouldn't have the chance normally to be together. And the cross-cutting nature of that, both public, private, and the various modes and everything allows you to have that the wisdom that's in some other segment of the industry, and technology maybe coming in one way, or even leadership, as Paula just mentioned, kinds of things you can kind of give a heads up to. But it's because you're not just in you're not a peg in a hole of whatever size. It allows you out, and you can't but help get enhanced your career and your personal abilities by having exposure. And it's just a great exposure, I think, in the best sense. I do want to put on the record, though, all this, for any chapter presidents listening, all this happy talk about everything works well at WTS. We had a hell of a time between the chapters and the national, and I had started a chapter, so I was very sympathetic to the chapters, but there was a lot of tension in my time, and I'm sure it's all perfect now. But a growing chapter that wants to, or when you go to host a conference, what a pain in the tush the board is. I mean, there are all sorts of inside politics that go on there. So if you felt some of those and you thought, gee, I'm the only one, please know that it's a big pain in the tush a number of times, and you just have to stick with it. And these people you fight with today are your buddies tomorrow, let me tell you. But there's a lot of different opinions on how things go, and women have them, and we're all leaders for a reason. And so it's a little rough going sometimes.
Yeah, 8,000 type A personalities. But, we actually had to face that as we started our rebranding and strategic plan. And we really wanted to listen to members, because there had been, let's be open about it, there had been some feelings over the years, as Grace mentioned, of this lack of trust between the international, not just board, but the organization and some of the chapters. And it was really rooted, I think, in people having expectations of the other that weren't being fulfilled. And our systems, our computer system, we couldn't even tell our chapters how many members they had. Our system was so bad. So 4 years ago, we started that reinvestment into a better database system, whatever you want to call the IT world, that would help support the chapters in a way that would take that burden off of them. And from 4 years ago, when I heard the word "we don't trust you" so many times, to today, we had an interesting call lately with chapter leaders, and we got off the phone, and I said, "Did anybody hear the word trust?" It wasn't even mentioned. And so, well, where folks, didn't say "we love you" and you're all doing the best job ever, I think that barrier that had been there forever has started to break down. And I credit Sarah and her staff for just being so consistent and reaching out and working with chapters on a daily basis. That's really, really helped change the tenor.
Here.
Yeah.
Making progress. We still have
Yeah.
lots to do. But appreciate that. I mean, so the four of you, we've kind of heard the story building here around WTS and our history, and the four of you have just been instrumental in that history. And not only at WTS, but also being trailblazers, working within the industry to advance women, ensure we have a diverse workforce. I want to speak to a moment, we have a moment right now that we're challenged to rise to with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but also a retiring workforce, right? And a call for social justice. We kind of have this storm that's creating right now. And this moment where we can make a lasting impact by training and hiring women and diverse women. We have a chance right now to impact future generations and make sure that we're recruiting in a diverse workforce. In your opinions, what will it take to rise to this challenge and meet the next step forward in creating an equitable and diverse workforce? What is it? What is WTS's role that we can play within that as well? And Sunny, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
Okay. Well, this was a really good question, and I'm glad we're discussing this. I've been advocating for diversity so many years. Before it was diversity and inclusion, before it was diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We've all been there. And I've participated in every diversity initiative in my companies, or I spearheaded them. But the one thing I always ran into was that we have to change the decision-making matrix at the top levels to remove that bias. Things will not change unless we have more women in the C-suites and on board of directors. So that's where I'm concentrating now. I have engaged and actively engaged actually in other organizations that are not just transportation. A good example is 50/50 Women on Boards, 5050wob.org, to advocate and to lead conversations on boardroom diversity. I'm personally serving on a couple of boards right now, and I'm looking, and this is private boards, and I'm looking to expand that because I think it's important to have that influence. This organization, 50/50 Women on Boards, releases quarterly reports on the number of women on boards for the Russell 3000 companies. These are the top 3,000 companies that are publicly traded. The last quarter report in 2021, for example, highlighted that there are now 27% women on boards nationally. And they also released by state. And I'm really pleased and proud to say that California has 32% women on boards on these 3,000 companies because of initiatives that this organization and others have pushed forward, like SB 826, in order to actually increase and mandate a certain number of women on boards. So I think for WTS, we don't have to duplicate this effort. There are people that are doing this. Why don't we maybe partner with them? These organizations have training classes. They have networking opportunities to actually show how women can get on the path to the boardroom. Why don't we let our members know that this is happening, that everyone that's on this call right now and every WTS member has the potential to one day be a board member or be in the C-suite. So let's take advantage of that and maybe do some partnerships. There are other organizations like Women Corporate Directors, there's just NACD, there's so many places where we can actually have some influence from WTS to get our members to that level.
Sarah, I think it's important. Sunny is absolutely right. You want to get the leadership there, but it's throughout the organization, and it's in your policies and procedures. It's in your hiring practices. It's making sure. I mean, some of the things we did at BART when I was there is mandated. I kept hearing that there weren't any this and there weren't any that and there weren't any people of color that do this or that, and it's like. And I got so much grief. I just said that I want a person of color and a woman on every hiring panel. And I got all sorts of reasons why that wasn't going to happen. And I said, it's fine. If you don't want to hire, you don't need to have a panel with that diversity on it. And they finally got it. And so then our numbers started to go up. Another thing that we did is we started a leadership academy, and in the leadership academy was mostly people of color and women. And there were some white males there, and they were welcome. But our goal was to try and inject with the knowledge, just like an internship program at a mid-career level, that allowed people to see the budgeting and the policy side of things and the political side of things. Each one of those members shadowed me for a day, which I thought was just a way to connect with them when I got started. But the feedback afterward was they got exposed to what the person at the top saw, and they were stunned. They didn't realize that I knew about their little things over here, as they called them. And they also didn't realize that, why was I paying attention to the homeless problem? Why was I working with, it was a topic at the time, but why was I working with the homeless programs in the 5 counties and spending so much time on that? And they're just your view changes if you're in a position over here, up here. And it allowed folks to, shadowing is another way to do it. You just expanding the network, if you will, and getting rid of the labels that are there is what WTS does a very good job of. And if that gets taken back to the workforce and you are mixing up your folks, you're getting rid of the silos in your organizations, you're allowing people to see stuff they hadn't seen before. And then you're allowing conversations to happen, and you have to listen. Brown bag lunches with folks, hosting anybody means anyone can self-select to come. There's no entry fee. And so if you're a struggling anybody, you can come, and it allows you to reach out. And it also takes away all sorts of entry level issues for people of color particularly. And I think as WTS, we focused on women for a very good reason, but we have to acknowledge that the white privilege exists and that people of color need just as much help and more, I would say, just in terms of access, and that network can benefit them. So work with Compto. We co-host things with Compto, and I worked really hard at BART to make sure we were a host. So just mixing it up is a good thing. Trying to take away barriers to entry is one. And Sunny certainly identified a key one at the top, the leadership of an organization and what's there and what the values are that are brought to that company or public entity.
Grace, you make a really good point about branching into other areas. When we did the strategic plan, was a moment when we had to ask ourselves, where is our diversity, inclusion, presence? Yes, we're all about women. Now, how do we make sure that we're not being exclusive and contributing to where we're all trying to go with diversity more broadly? And one of the things that we're really focused on now, and it helps that Sarah's deputy director just recently went to Compto as their new president at Compto, April Rye. And so we have a much tighter partnership with Compto at the national level, but also with all of the other associations that I mentioned, the ASHTO, APTA, ARTBA, TRB, working across the recognition that we're all better together. And if we do some things not independently and in silos, that we can help change the way that selections are made, candidates are advanced, recruits are found, scholarships and direction for support at the school age level. We're really trying to build that collaborative, I think, in a way that's going to help us all make a difference. So I love that you mentioned that.
Well, I was just going to suggest HBCUs and reaching out to universities and bringing in interns. Summer internships are a perfect way to kind of get a kid's interest and see a paycheck as well, Yeah. And I just think we need to do more and be more aggressive. The more we can do, the better we can be.
And if I could, Paula, you mentioned branding. I think we could really expand the understanding, particularly in the high school and college levels, about a career in transportation. Transportation affects, we're not just widgets or moving trains on time. Grace is moving trains on time because maybe a mother has a sick kid at daycare and needs to have daytime frequency. transportation impacts people's lives. It's a wonderful career for women. And I think sometimes they aren't as familiar as they could be about the impact of a super transportation system to which they could contribute.
I think the fact that we have the Transportation U program and some chapters have adopted school programs, those are all great things.
Yeah.
I think we need to do that more consistently and at an earlier grade level. We really need to influence these lives of the girls and girls of all colors to think about the potential, because by the time it gets to high school, I think people are afraid of math or sciences and things like that, and they just don't even think that way to get to the next level. But there's so much potential there. We got to build that pipeline.
And Sarah, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I don't remember the number. What was the scholarship amount, our new annual scholarship amounts that our chapters and International Foundation have put out on a yearly basis? It's grown tremendously.
Yes, as an organization, the foundation gives out over $600,000 a year in scholarships.
Awesome.
Fabulous.
So more of that is, that's what's going to make a difference. And I love the idea of helping facilitate internships, Grace. And both the public and private sector are always looking for interns, and that's such a great way to introduce them.
And reel in the talent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to be cognizant of time, so I want to do a quick fire last question here. We've talked a lot about the history of WTS and where we've been, but I want to focus and leave everyone with where we're going. And if you could describe WTS's future in 1 or 2 words, what would that be? And Chris, as our founder, I'm going to start with you, because could you even imagine when you started this that WTS would be here today?
No, I never could have. I hats off to all of you, really. I'm glad you're allowing me 2 words. So my words are ever aspiring.
Love
Thanks.
that. Love that. Paula, what about you?
I would say transformative in all directions.
Snuck a couple extra ones in there.
Well, I can never just use one word.
Grace, what about you?
I think inspirational. Need to have that flame inside and carry it and show it.
Love it. Sunny, what about you?
The first word that came to my mind was transcending, because we've always risen above and beyond. Sky is the limit for WTS, and we haven't even reached that potential yet.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Again, I send my apologies from Janet Walker-Ford. She's our current vice chair of WTS International, our incoming chair in May, who could not be here to moderate this. But I feel privileged to be able to have stepped in for her and to be able to hear the story from all of you. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to hear more and hope to see all of you at our 50th anniversary, which will be in 2027. But thank you for helping us wrap up our celebration of Women's History Month. Just a reminder to all of those on the line that we'll continue to celebrate over the course of the next week. There is a new member discount to join WTS, so please reach out. We look forward to coming back in person for you being part of this fabulous network. So thank you again to all of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Tell
Bye,
Janet.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Wonderful.
Thanks.